The encounter. The great station of Valar Prime was alive with noise and color as traders from 100 worlds crowded the wide streets and glowing corridors. Ships of every size hovered above the docking bays while merchants shouted in different languages, offering spices, minerals, and strange tools that could only be found on the outer rim. In the middle of that chaos, Daniel Walker moved quietly with his tool bag slung across his shoulder. He was a human engineer who fixed broken generators and patched hulls for a modest fee. To most aliens, he was just another face in the sea of travelers. Nothing special, nothing powerful. He liked it that way, blending in and living simply, far from the politics and wars that always seemed to follow humanity. He stopped at a small cafe that glowed with soft blue light, the smell of hot drinks drifting into the passageway. It was one of the few places he could afford, and also one of the few that reminded him of Earth with its warm seats and steady hum of conversation. He ordered his usual, a cup of steaming Tyrrell, and stood to the side waiting. That was when he noticed her. She stood at the counter dressed in plain traveling clothes, yet there was something about her presence that made her stand out. Her silver hair shimmered even under the dull lighting, and her deep violet eyes studied the menu with quiet grace. She looked tired, perhaps even a little lost. When the server asked for payment, she hesitated. Her hands searched her pockets and she frowned at the unfamiliar machine. The line behind her grew restless, some aliens muttering about delay. Daniel could have ignored it, but something in the way she shifted, trying not to show embarrassment, tugged at him. Without thinking, he stepped forward and tapped his own wristband against the reader. The machine chimed approval. "I've got it covered," he said lightly. She turned, surprised, her violet eyes widening. For a moment she just stared at him as if she could not believe someone would do such a thing for her. Then she gave the smallest smile and nodded in thanks. She took her cup of steaming crimson drink and stepped aside. Daniel thought nothing more of it, collected his own Tyrrell and sat down by the window. To him it was just a small kindness, the kind anyone should offer when another was struggling. But to her it was different. Lysira, though she wore the clothes of a traveler, was no ordinary woman. She was the Empress of the Lizaran Consortium, one of the wealthiest and most powerful rulers in the quadrant. She had left her palace in secret, tired of the endless parade of suitors and advisors, tired of the shallow games of politics. For months she had searched for something that all her power could not buy, an heir who would not be born of manipulation and greed, but of something genuine. And now, in the middle of a crowded cafe on a trade station, an unknown human had stepped forward, not to bow, not to flatter, but simply to help. Lysira sat across the room and watched him. He sipped his Tyrrell calmly, unaware of the weight of her gaze. He wore simple clothes stained with grease, his hands rough from work, yet there was a steadiness in the way he carried himself. She could see no ambition in his eyes, no hunger for wealth or status. For the first time in years, she felt curiosity spark in her heart. Who was this human who treated her like anyone else, who offered kindness without expecting anything in return? Daniel noticed her looking at him once or twice, but thought nothing of it. Strangers often stared at humans out here, sometimes in wonder, sometimes in disdain. He was used to it. After finishing his drink, he stood and adjusted his tool bag. He had work waiting in one of the lower docks, a freighter with a faulty reactor coil, and credits did not earn themselves. As he left the cafe, Lysira rose as well. She pulled her hood up to hide her hair and followed him into the crowd, her mind already turning with plans. This human had no idea what storm he had just stepped into. The invitation. Daniel left the cafe and pushed through the flow of traders and workers that crowded the main concourse of Valar Prime. His mind was already on the next repair job waiting for him. A freighter captain had promised decent credits if he could fix a failing reactor coil before departure. That money would keep him supplied for weeks, maybe even give him enough to rent a better workshop. He did not notice that a figure moved through the crowd behind him, keeping pace with his steps. Lysira walked with her hood low, blending with travelers. Her thoughts raced as she considered the man who had helped her so casually. She had seen countless nobles bow before her throne, seen warriors fight for her approval, seen merchants offer fortunes just to gain her favor. Yet this human, this mechanic with rough hands, had done something none of them had. He had treated her as though she were simply a person. That alone set him apart. Daniel reached the lower docks where the air was thick with the smell of fuel and overheated engines. Sparks flew from welding torches while voices barked over comms about cargo and schedules. He approached a wide-bellied freighter and greeted the captain, a scaled alien with nervous eyes. They discussed the reactor issue, and Daniel quickly lost himself in the work. Hours passed as he crawled through narrow tunnels, checked conduits, and tightened seals. He was focused, steady, unbothered by the noise outside. When he finally emerged, sweaty and covered in grease, the coil hummed steadily again. The captain paid him and hurried away, leaving Daniel to wipe his hands on a rag. He slung the tool bag over his shoulder and started back toward his small rented quarters. That was when she appeared again. Lizera stepped from the shadows of the docking bay and approached him. Her hood was still drawn, but he recognized her violet eyes immediately. He frowned, surprised to see her there. She smiled slightly and said she wished to thank him properly for his kindness. Daniel waved it off, telling her it was nothing, just a drink. But she insisted, her voice carrying a quiet command even through the simple words. She invited him to join her for dinner at a higher level of the station, where the lights burned brighter and the music never stopped. Daniel hesitated. He was not used to being invited anywhere by strangers, especially strangers with such piercing eyes. Yet something about her presence made it difficult to refuse. Finally, with a shrug, he agreed. They took a lift to one of the upper rings where the wealthy spent their credits. Daniel felt out of place immediately. The walls shimmered with polished glass and glowing art. The air carried sweet scents instead of grease and oil, and everywhere he looked he saw richly dressed aliens laughing and talking over plates of food that cost more than his monthly rent. Lizera walked ahead, calm and graceful, as though she belonged there completely. Daniel followed, wondering how this woman who had struggled with a cafe machine could now walk so confidently in such a place. She led him into a restaurant that gleamed with silver pillars and floating light orbs. Servers in fine uniforms bowed as she entered. They did not bow to him, but to her. Daniel noticed but said nothing. He was shown to a table by the window where ships sparkled like stars outside. Lizera removed her hood, and in the brighter light her silver hair shimmered again. Heads turned across the room, whispers rising, but she ignored them. She watched Daniel as though measuring his reaction. He shifted uncomfortably but held her gaze. They ordered food, though Daniel barely recognized the names. She encouraged him to try the dishes, and he did, finding some strange but good enough. Their conversation moved slowly at first. She asked about his work, his past, why he had come to Velar Prime. He answered honestly, speaking of Earth, of his choice to travel and take jobs far from home. He said he liked fixing things because broken machines did not lie or cheat. They simply needed care and patience. Lizera listened closely, her eyes never leaving him. When he asked about her, she gave only vague answers, saying she traveled often, that she came from a place where life was complicated, that she sought something she could not find among her own people. Daniel did not press, though he noticed how carefully she chose her words. There was weight behind them, secrets she would not share yet. By the end of the evening, Daniel felt both curious and wary. He still did not understand why she had insisted on bringing him here. She seemed far above his station, out of reach in every way, yet she watched him with interest as if he were the one with value. When they parted at the lift, she told him she hoped to see him again. Her voice carried both warmth and something commanding, like a promise and an order wrapped together. Daniel returned to his small quarters with his thoughts tangled. He had only bought a drink for a stranger, yet that single act had led him into a world he did not recognize. The revelation of power. The next day, Daniel rose early and made his way back to the docks for another repair job. His life was simple, and he liked it that way, though his mind kept drifting to the strange dinner he had shared with the woman named Lizera. Something about her unsettled him. She carried herself with quiet confidence. Her voice was firm even when she tried to sound casual, and people around her reacted in ways he did not understand. The servers had bowed, strangers had whispered, and the air had shifted when she revealed her face. He pushed the thoughts aside and focused on work. He was halfway through fixing a faulty compressor when a shadow fell over him. Looking up, he saw Lizera standing there once again, her silver hair hidden beneath her hood. She asked if she might walk with him after his work was done. He agreed reluctantly, wiping sweat from his brow. Soon they left the noise of the docks and moved toward the quieter upper halls. Daniel asked why she kept following him, why she had chosen him of all people. Lizera smiled but did not answer directly. Instead, she led him to a viewing deck that overlooked the vast stretch of space outside. Ships glided by like glittering fish in a cosmic sea. Before Daniel could press her further, the air filled with a sudden commotion. A group of heavily armed guards entered, their armor polished and their weapons gleaming. To Daniel's shock, they bowed low before Lysera, their heads bent in deep respect. One of them spoke in a tone of reverence, announcing that her ship awaited, and her presence was required. Daniel turned to her, stunned. He demanded to know who she really was. Lysera sighed and slowly pushed back her hood, allowing the full glow of her silver hair and violet eyes to show. The guards remained bowed, awaiting her word. She told him she was Lysera Velaris, Empress of the Lyceran Consortium, ruler of dozens of worlds, and owner of riches beyond imagination. Daniel froze, the weight of her words crashing over him. He thought back to the cafe where she had fumbled with a simple payment device, to the way she had insisted on dinner, to the whispers in the restaurant. It all made sense now. He had not been dealing with a traveler or a lost woman. He had been speaking to one of the most powerful beings in the quadrant. Lysera studied his face carefully, expecting awe or fear, perhaps even desperate flattery. That was what most offered her when they learned her name. Instead, Daniel narrowed his eyes and asked why someone with so much power would hide in common clothes and let a stranger buy her a drink. His tone was sharp, not reverent. He did not bow or kneel. He only stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her answer. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Lysera laughed softly, a sound tinged with both surprise and relief. She said that was exactly why she had sought him out again. He was not impressed by wealth or crowns, and that made him more valuable than any noble she had ever met. She admitted she had been searching for someone beyond the reach of politics and greed, someone who could see her not as a throne but as a person. Daniel shook his head, muttering that he had no interest in thrones or empires. He fixed ships, he earned his keep, and he wanted no part in royal games. But Lysera stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. She told him he did not yet understand, that his small kindness in the cafe had already changed his path. She promised him opportunities he could never imagine, not in wealth alone, but in purpose. The guards shifted uneasily as the Empress lingered too long without moving to her ship. Lysera raised a hand to silence them. She looked back at Daniel and told him that she would show him why she had chosen him. She offered him a place at her side, not as a servant but as something far greater. Daniel felt the weight of her gaze and the gravity of her words. For the first time, he realized the storm he had stepped into was not something he could simply walk away from. As she turned and led her guards toward a towering vessel that gleamed like a shard of crystal, Daniel stood frozen. His mind battled with disbelief and suspicion. Part of him wanted to run, to disappear back into the crowd and forget he had ever met her, but another part deep inside burned with a strange curiosity. He had glimpsed the reality behind her disguise, and now he knew there was no turning back. The proposal Daniel did not sleep that night. He lay on the narrow bed in his small quarters, staring at the dull ceiling above him. The image of Lysera revealing herself as an empress would not leave his mind. He thought of the guards bowing low, of the whispers in the restaurant, of the way her words carried the weight of entire worlds. He tried to tell himself that none of it mattered to him, that he was just a mechanic who fixed ships and wanted no part in empires, but deep down, he knew his life had already shifted. She had singled him out for reasons he could not yet understand, and that truth followed him into restless dreams. The next day, as if summoned by his thoughts, she returned. This time there were no hoods or disguises. Lysera arrived in her full regalia, her silver hair flowing like light, her eyes gleaming with power, her guards clearing a path as she walked through the lower docks. Workers and merchants stopped to stare, some kneeling, others whispering her name. Daniel stood frozen as she approached, every step deliberate, every motion declaring her authority. She stopped before him, and for a moment the noise of the station seemed to vanish. She asked him to come with her, not as a subject but as her guest. Against his better judgment, he agreed. They boarded her ship, a vessel so grand it seemed more palace than craft. Walls shimmered with silver light, halls echoed with the soft hum of advanced technology, and servants bowed as they passed. Daniel walked stiffly at her side, overwhelmed by the grandeur yet determined not to show it. She led him into a chamber lined with tall windows that opened to the stars. There she dismissed her attendants and turned to him with a seriousness that made his chest tighten. Lysera spoke of her empire, of the power she held, and the enemies who waited for her to falter. She told him of endless suitors, warriors, and nobles who sought her hand, not out of love but out of hunger for her throne. She explained that her people demanded an heir, that her rule would be challenged if she did not produce one. Her voice did not waver as she laid bare the weight she carried. Daniel listened, trying to grasp the enormity of what she revealed. Finally, she turned her gaze fully upon him and made her proposal. She asked him to stand at her side, not as a servant but as her partner, the father of the heir she must have. Daniel felt the breath leave his chest. He stared at her, waiting for her to laugh or say she was joking, but her expression was unyielding. She was completely serious. He shook his head and stepped back, unable to believe what he had heard. He was a mechanic, a drifter with no wealth or title, a man who paid for his meals with small jobs. And here stood a ruler of worlds asking him to share her throne and give her an heir. He demanded to know why. Why him? Why not a prince or a soldier or anyone from her endless court? Lysera answered with quiet conviction. She said that in all her years surrounded by power and riches, no one had ever treated her as he had. He had seen her struggle with something simple and had helped without hesitation, without calculation. He had not bowed, not begged, not demanded anything in return. In him she saw strength that was not born of ambition but of heart. She said that was the kind of strength her empire needed, the kind of strength her heir must inherit. Daniel felt torn. Part of him wanted to laugh at the absurdity, to walk out and never look back, but another part could not ignore the fire in her eyes, the way her words cut through the layers of titles and riches. He told her he was no ruler, no hero, only a man trying to survive. She replied that sometimes the ones who do not seek power are the ones best fit to wield it. Her voice softened as she added that she was not asking him out of desperation, but out of choice, that she had chosen him when she could have chosen anyone else. Silence filled the chamber as Daniel wrestled with the weight of her words. The stars burned outside the windows, endless and cold, while inside he stood face to face with a woman who carried the fate of worlds. She had asked him to join her, to become something far beyond anything he had ever imagined. His heart pounded as he realized that his answer, whatever it might be, would change both their lives forever. The test of worth. Daniel stood in silence long after Lysera's words faded into the vast chamber. The idea of becoming her partner and fathering an heir felt like something from a dream, yet the weight of her gaze told him she was not speaking in fantasy. He tried to argue that he was unworthy, that she could choose from countless nobles and warriors, but she silenced him with a single raised hand. She told him words were not enough, and that his true worth would be proven not by talk but by action. Within hours, he found himself aboard her flagship as it sailed through the void toward a contested border world. Lysera explained that rivals within the consortium had begun to doubt her strength. They whispered that she had grown soft, and that her empire could be taken from her if she did not act with resolve. She would need to stand before them and demand their loyalty, but more importantly, she wished for Daniel to stand beside her. He protested fiercely, insisting that he was not trained in politics or diplomacy. Yet Lysera only replied that she wanted him to be himself. If he could face her rivals with the same steady honesty he had shown her, she believed he would prove more intimidating than all her guards combined. The ship arrived at the world of Xairis, a glittering hub where nobles and merchants gathered. Daniel had never seen such a place. Towers of crystal reached into the clouds, streets shimmered with energy lights, and thousands of beings lined the grand plaza to witness the Empress's arrival. Lysera emerged in regal attire, her silver hair crowned with a diadem that sparkled like a star. She walked with grace and fire, her people bowing deeply. Daniel followed at her side, wearing only his plain clothes, grease still staining the fabric. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Who was this human who walked beside their ruler as though he belonged there? Inside the council chamber, the rival lords gathered. They were tall and proud, dressed in robes heavy with jewels, their eyes sharp with ambition. They bowed with shallow respect and then began their accusations. They questioned her strength, her decisions, her ability to lead. One asked pointedly why she traveled with a human mechanic instead of a trusted advisor. Another sneered that she seemed desperate if she surrounded herself with commoners. Daniel clenched his fists, but Lysera gave him a small nod, urging him to speak. He stepped forward, feeling every eye in the chamber fall upon him. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to speak plainly. He told them he was no noble and no soldier. He admitted that he came from Earth, a world many of them dismissed as rough and backward. But he said that where he came from, respect was earned not through titles or wealth but through action. He told them that when a machine broke, it did not matter how rich the owner was, it still needed someone willing to crawl into the dark and fix it with his own hands. He told them that leadership was no different. A ruler who did not care for the smallest of her people was unworthy, but a ruler who treated all lives with equal weight was strong beyond measure. The chamber fell silent. Some looked insulted, others thoughtful, but none could deny the conviction in his voice. Lysera smiled faintly and declared that this was why she chose to walk with him, because he saw truth beyond the glitter of jewels. The rivals shifted uneasily, and though their whispers continued, the fire in their accusations dimmed. They could see that this human did not fear them, and that in itself was power. That evening, Lysera brought Daniel to the balcony of her palace on Zairis. Crowds below cheered her name, banners of her house flying proudly. She turned to him and said he had passed the first test. He had stood before those who doubted her and spoken with honesty, when most would have cowered. She warned him that more trials would come, for her enemies would not yield so easily, but she promised that together they could weather them all. Daniel looked out at the endless sea of lights, the sound of voices rising into the night air. For the first time he felt something shift within him. He was still a mechanic, still a drifter, yet in standing beside her he had touched something greater than himself. He did not know if he could ever be the man she wanted him to be, but he knew he could not turn away now. The choice. The journey back from Zairis was quiet. Daniel stood by the windows of the Empress's ship, staring out into the endless stretch of stars. His mind spun with everything that had happened. He had spoken before nobles and lords, people who could crush him with a single word, yet he had faced them without bowing. He did not know if his words had changed their hearts, but Lysera believed he had proven something that could not be ignored. The strange part was that she looked at him now with more trust than ever, as though she had known all along he would rise to the moment. Lysera entered the chamber where he stood, her steps soft against the shining floor. She watched him silently for a moment before speaking. She told him that the time for games was over. She had shown him her world, she had let him see her enemies, and she had tested his courage. Now there remained one thing left to do. He must decide. She would no longer pull him forward without his will. He would either walk away from her and return to his quiet life among broken machines, or he would accept her proposal and stand at her side as her chosen partner, not for a day or a week, but for the rest of his life. Daniel turned to her, his jaw tight. He admitted that part of him longed for the simple days where he only had to worry about engines and credits. He said he was not built for palaces and politics, that he would never belong in the glittering halls she ruled. But Lysera stepped closer, her violet eyes locked on his, and she told him she did not need him to be polished or noble. She needed him to be real. She said her throne was surrounded by liars and flatterers, men who bent their knees but dreamed of betrayal. He was the first who had spoken to her without fear, who had helped her without calculation. That was what she wanted beside her. Not another jewel, but a steady stone. Daniel's heart pounded as he listened. He felt her words strike something deep inside him, something he had buried long ago. He had left Earth to escape wars and politics, to live as a man who fixed what was broken and asked for nothing else. Yet standing here, hearing her speak with such fire, he realized he had found more purpose in a few days with her than in years of wandering. Still, he feared what it would mean to step into her world fully. He told her honestly that he was afraid of failing her, afraid of being swallowed by forces greater than himself. Lysera did not look away. She raised her hand and placed it gently over his chest, feeling the beat of his heart. She told him fear was not weakness, fear was proof that he understood the weight of the choice. She confessed that she too was afraid of ruling alone, afraid of giving her people an heir who would be raised in a world of lies. Her voice softened as she admitted that when he bought her that drink in the cafe, she had felt seen as a woman for the first time in years. Not as an empress, not as a ruler, but as someone who needed help and was given it without condition. The ship hummed around them, carrying them through the void, but in that chamber it felt as if the universe had grown still. Daniel closed his eyes and let her words sink in. He thought of the crowd cheering her name, of the nobles questioning her strength, of the loneliness he had seen in her eyes when she spoke of her burdens. He realized that the choice was not only about him but about both of them, about two lives intersecting in a way neither had planned. When he opened his eyes again, she was still watching him, waiting without pressure. For the first time since he had met her, Daniel understood that she was giving him true freedom. He could walk away and she would let him, though it might break something inside her, or he could stay, knowing the path would be hard but meaningful. The silence stretched until finally Daniel whispered that he had not yet decided but that he was close. Very close. Lysera nodded slowly, accepting his honesty. She told him that whatever his answer, she would not forget what he had already given her. That night Daniel lay awake again, but his thoughts were no longer scattered. He knew his life stood on the edge of change, and soon he would have to step forward or step back. The stars beyond the window seemed to watch him, patient and endless, as if waiting for him to choose his place among them. The bond sealed. The morning after was filled with tension. Daniel woke in his quarters aboard the Empress's ship, his thoughts heavy with the weight of the choice before him. The quiet hum of the engines seemed louder than usual, as though the ship itself was waiting for his answer. He splashed water on his face and stared at his reflection in the polished metal wall. He still saw the same man he had always been, a mechanic with grease under his nails and little to his name. Yet now that face looked back at him with something new, something he had not felt in years, the sense that his life carried meaning beyond survival. When he stepped into the main hall, Lysera was waiting. She stood near the tall windows, her silver hair glowing under the artificial light, her violet eyes calm but searching. Her guards kept their distance, giving the two of them space. She did not ask him for his decision right away. Instead, she walked with him down the long corridor until they reached a chamber filled with banners of her house. There she stopped and turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. She told him that the Council of Nobles had sent word, demanding proof that she was prepared to secure her line. She said time was short, that soon she would need to stand before them again, and that this time he must either stand at her side or walk away forever. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as the empress of a vast consortium, but as a woman who carried impossible burdens. He saw the loneliness she tried to hide behind her strength, the longing for something real in a world of lies. He realized that his choice was not about thrones or heirs or even about himself. It was about her, about the woman who had searched through countless suitors yet had found meaning in a single act of kindness. He took a deep breath and told her his answer. He said that he was afraid, that he would never be polished or noble, that he would make mistakes. But he also said that he would not abandon her, that he would stand with her not because of her crown but because of the woman she was. Beneath it, he promised that if she wanted him, truly wanted him, then he would be her partner, her protector, and the father of the heir she needed. For the first time since he had met her, Lysera's composure cracked. Her eyes softened and her lips curved into a smile that held both relief and warmth. She stepped closer and placed her hands on his shoulders, her voice trembling as she thanked him. She told him that with those words he had given her more than all the riches of her empire. He had given her hope. That evening, the great hall of the consortium blazed with light as the Empress returned to face her council. Nobles and merchants filled the chamber, their voices buzzing with speculation. When Lysera entered, silence fell. She walked tall, her silver hair shining, her violet eyes steady, and at her side walked Daniel, no longer just a mechanic but chosen by her hand. Gasps spread through the chamber, whispers rising like waves. Some looked outraged, others curious, but none could deny the strength in the way she held herself and the quiet determination in the way he walked beside her. Lysera raised her voice so all could hear. She declared that she had chosen her partner, not from among the nobles who begged for her throne, but from among the people who showed her what true strength was. She declared that Daniel of Earth would stand with her, that he would share in her legacy, and that together they would bring forth the heir the empire demanded. Her words echoed through the hall, and though many faces showed shock, none dared to speak against her. Daniel felt the eyes of the galaxy upon him, yet he did not falter. He stood tall, remembering the cafe where it all began, remembering the simple act that had brought him here. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, that enemies would rise and challenges would test them both, but he also knew that he had found something he could not turn away from. He had found purpose, and he had found her. That night, As the ship carried them away from the council chambers and back into the stars, Daniel and Lysra stood together at the viewing window. The galaxy stretched before them, endless and full of dangers, but also full of possibilities. She slipped her hand into his, and for the first time he did not feel like an outsider. He felt like he belonged, not because of her crown or her empire, but because they had chosen each other. And so the mechanic from Earth and the Empress of Worlds began a new chapter, bound not by power or riches but by trust, kindness, and the promise of a future they would build together. A new legacy. The decision was made, and the galaxy seemed to shift in its wake. Daniel had stepped out from the shadows of a quiet life and into the blinding light of destiny. What began with a simple act of kindness in a crowded cafe had turned into a bond that stretched across worlds and into the hearts of millions. The Empress had found what no counsel or fortune could give her, a man who stood with her not because of her crown but because of who she was when all the titles fell away. In the days that followed the announcement, voices rose across the empire. Some shouted in protest, angered that their ruler had chosen a human from a forgotten world over the polished heirs of noble houses. Others whispered with admiration, struck by the courage of an empress who defied tradition to claim her own path. And in the midst of all the uproar, Daniel remained steady, neither dazzled by the grandeur nor shaken by the doubt of others. He remembered the words he had spoken to the lords of Xairis, that true strength was measured not by jewels or crowns, but by action and honesty. Those words became his armor as he walked into a future that would demand everything from him. Lysra watched him closely, her eyes holding both pride and wonder. She had spent years surrounded by false smiles and hollow loyalty, and now she found herself beside a man who gave her truth even when it was hard to hear. At first she had feared he might break under the pressure of her world, but instead she saw him grow stronger with each step. He spoke to her people with sincerity. He listened to the voices of those who had long been ignored, and slowly he began to win their respect. Not because he forced them, but because he lived with the same integrity he had shown on the first day they met. Together they traveled to the farthest edges of her domain, facing challenges that would have torn apart lesser rulers. When pirates threatened trade lanes, Daniel was there, not as a soldier but as a voice of reason and courage. When rival houses spread lies to weaken Lysra's claim, he countered not with empty boast but with actions that proved his devotion to her and to the people she ruled. With every trial their bond deepened, not forged in luxury but in fire. In private, when the halls of the palace were quiet and the galaxy seemed far away, Daniel and Lysra spoke not of politics but of dreams. They dreamed of a future heir who would grow up not in the shadow of fear, but in the light of love and trust. They dreamed of building a legacy not written in blood and greed but in unity, and though the weight of responsibility never left them, those moments reminded them why they had chosen each other. One evening they stood together on the highest balcony of the capital, the night sky stretching wide above them. Below, the city shimmered with lights, a living reflection of the empire they now shared. Daniel looked at Lysra and saw not the Empress of 100 worlds, but the woman who had once stood embarrassed in a cafe holding a hot drink she could not pay for. Lysra looked at Daniel and saw not a mechanic covered in grease, but the man who had given her what she had sought all along. Not riches, not power, but honesty and heart. Their hands joined, their eyes locked, and for the first time the galaxy seemed quiet, as if it too paused to honor their choice. Whatever storms would come, they would face them together. And whatever history would write, it would remember not the Empress or the mechanic alone, but the two of them united by something greater than power. And so their story began anew, not an ending but a promise that would echo across stars. The end.